Kate Nilafalcha, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. Welcome back, everybody who is a faithful viewer and old-time subscriber. And a big welcome to all my new subscribers. I really appreciate that. And for sure, check out my Substack. Some people have been having trouble connecting. Here's my advice. Skip the app on your phone at first. Go on a computer, a laptop, or a desktop and type in on Google substack.com. When you get their site, Substack's site, it's full of all these different writers and content providers. So what you do there when you get the main home page is search Ask Your Irish Granny. That should do it. If not, I don't know what to say. Some people have trouble with the app on their phone. It's the same process. Download the app. When it's downloaded, go to the home page and type in Ask Your Irish Granny. And yes, there's a public feed on my site. It's all free. And there's a membership, which is not free. I think it's like $4 or $5. I can't remember what the lowest tier was, but I did that for the sake of privacy, I guess. It's the illusion. And of course, I have membership on YouTube, 99 cents, just a token to provide some sense of protection from the trolling, And I do personal readings if you're interested. My email will be under the video. So all that being said, I am still in pursuit of true crime stories. I'm looking for distraction. I wouldn't call it entertainment because nobody enjoys these things. However, the mystery intrigues. And I'm hoping to distract people from the real world at the moment a little bit every week. So this particular event has been covered by documentaries. It's on all the famous, crime type episodic stories on television. It's a very sad story, and I'm going to be careful about my terminology. But I think you'll catch on to what I'm saying. And we'll read cards after I give you the background. And I hope to be doing a session with Deborah Lupien about it, which should be very interesting. So my nose is already starting to itch. That tells me that there's messages coming. Okay. Today we're going to discuss the yogurt shop murders. This is really sad. This is terrible. And there's one family who lost 2 children in this event, and I just can't even imagine. Anyway, Friday, December 6th, 1991, 4 girls died in the I Can't Believe It's Yogurt shop in Austin, Texas. Sometime after closing, they closed at 11. They were 13-year-old Amy Ayers, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison, and her sister, 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison. Jennifer and Eliza, the 2 older girls, they were friends, and this was their, high school job, working on a Friday night. So these were, all 4 of them, decent kids from just average middle-class families. There was nothing remarkable about them in the sense that they didn't come from terribly troubled backgrounds. They weren't dipping their toe into the underworld. They weren't troubled teens who perhaps unwittingly involved themselves with shady characters without realizing it. None of that. I forget which one of them was huge in the horse world. She was a great equestrian. I didn't research the girls very much. Frankly, it just made me sad. And there's so much information out there. I thought I would get just to the bare outline of the story, and we would read the cards. And I don't want to dwell too much on the tragedy of it. I'm more interested in trying to figure out the mystery of what happened. So Sarah and Amy were pals. This is the 13-year-old and the 15-year-old, and they were hanging around at the mall. Remember the mall? The mall used to be a great place to go. I was too old to go to the mall as a teenager because that was just when they were becoming a thing. But when my children were little, we live in the middle of nowhere, and oftentimes, especially in the winter, there is just nothing to do. So we'd pack off to the mall, which was an hour and a half away, of a Saturday afternoon, and hang out at the bookstore. And Claire's. So anyway, I had girls. Sarah and Amy were hanging out at the mall, and they had an arrangement that Jennifer, Sarah's older sister, would leave the yogurt shop and drive over to the mall, pick them up, and bring them back to the yogurt shop at whatever time the mall cooled down. And they would hang out and help clean up at the end of the shift, and all four girls would go home together after closing, which was 11. I'm pretty sure I said that, but just in case. So there were some observations that might have been a bit unusual. We don't know, but we'll mention them. About 10 o'clock in the evening, and a fairly busy yogurt shop because, you know, people were out on dates, families were going out for ice cream or yogurt, dessert after movies and that kind of thing. So there was a line in the shop, and at about 10 p.m. there was a guy that was hassling customers in line. He was annoying, and it doesn't go into detail what that means, but he then asked to use the bathroom, to go to the toilet, which was actually supposed to be employees only, but the girls let him go back. It was behind the counter of refrigerator yogurt and in the back office back there. And he was gone a really long time, but they were busy. It was just later that people remembered this, because witnesses in line couldn't help but notice him. He was a gigantic pain. They noticed he was gone a long time. You know, there were tables, and people would get their yogurt and sit and eat, kind of like 31 Flavors, that kind of an idea. It's a small sort of ice cream parlor-ish sensibility. But he was gone a very long time. And after the fact, the question was, did he somehow jam the back door open to allow somebody to enter after hours? They just don't know. There was a couple who left right at closing. There was nobody else left in the shop. The girls were starting to clean up, you know, wipe tables, put chairs up, fill the napkin holders, count the money in the till. And there was evidence that that chore had begun. And there were these two guys left at a table against the wall who were skeevy, you know, creepy. And this couple remembered them sitting there and realized that the girls were alone and they were leaving, but there were four girls, so, you know. So they were acting sketchy. And as this couple left, Jennifer locked the door behind them so the men could leave. You could get out, but nobody new could come in. So it was closing time, no more new customers. So that's what we know about the inside of this shop. At midnight, and this is really interesting, if you go on some streaming service, I forget who, I hope it's not Disney streaming service, because we got rid of that yesterday. Hulu, Disney. Anyway, there's a documentary. And the first cop on the scene was actually in the neighborhood. He reported seeing smoke. He was the one who reported that there was a problem at this yogurt shop. He was doing a ride along with somebody, I don't know if it was a journalist or a student, I didn't go back and check, but it's immaterial. The point is, in this ride along, the passenger was filming. And so the discovery of problems at the yogurt shop was all on video at the time. So he called it in and he stopped and investigated and found that the shop inside was full of smoke and there was a fire. They didn't quite know where, but the fire department showed up. The first responders broke in and found the 4 girls in the back room on the floor without life. One had been unconsensually encountered. I'm sorry, it's ridiculous to have to speak this way, but that's what's going on with the algorithms. And they forensically discovered that 2 different guns were used, which kind of indicates maybe 2 people, maybe. And back door was open, and they think that whoever did it left by the back door. So investigators thought this was done by an adult or adults and not children, not teenagers, because it was a very controlled scene. It would be difficult to control for young women, although guns were involved. And the element of surprise is powerful too. The fact that arson was used to cover evidence, that's an organized sort of thing. They eventually did manage to get a DNA profile. They got 1 DNA profile. But the investigation itself was chaos. The scene wasn't well controlled. I believe the girls were piled and they had to move them from the back. Accelerant had been used, I believe, to set them on fire. And it was an attempt to conceal evidence. The firefighters had to put out the fire. So water is just a real destroyer of crime scenes. So there is a whole investigative thing, and I'm going to touch on it. I'm not going to go into enormous detail. 4 young guys. Okay, so one young teenager got pulled over and he had a gun, and it was the same caliber as one of the guns. So this alerted the cops, and they began a lengthy, I want to say like it was more than 10-hour interrogation of this guy. And his friend was dragged in, and what happened was they were questioned. They were under suspicion, but there was no evidence. Excuse me. And they were cleared in 1991 from lack of evidence. But then a new detective came on the case, and he started over and took another look, and he dragged the kids in again. And this is when the really bad, lengthy, coercive confessions happened. There was a lot of concern about how coercive these confessions were. This is a long time ago, things were slightly different. And it was terrible. They didn't know about coerced confessions and the psychology behind it. It's uncertain whether the original interrogations accidentally transmitted information from suspect to suspect. We'll never know. What did they know themselves, and what did they hear from the cops? Because the interrogations were poorly done. So they did incriminate themselves, and eventually 2 of them went on trial. And the trial was very graphic. There was liberal use of crime scene photographs and crying family members, and emotional element was very high. As you can imagine, this is a terrible thing. And human psychology being what it is, they really wanted to blame somebody and they wanted somebody punished. And these two young men were convicted. There was no physical evidence. One got life because he was 15 at the time the crime happened, and the other got capital punishment. So this was controversial. This was much debated and discussed. There was a lot of pushback about it in public opinion. And in 2009, both were given their freedom on a technicality, and I wasn't entirely sure what this meant, but I'll tell you and you might understand it. They were let go because of what's called the confrontation clause, which is the situation where testimony of the defendants used parts of each other's confessions, but the co-defendant didn't testify. And I'm not entirely sure how that works out in the real world, but it's a technicality in the sense that it doesn't follow the hard and fast rules of testimony. So it's not that they were let go because somebody forgot to read them their Miranda rights. Not that kind of technicality. There's always been questions about what they knew from experience of the event and what they knew from gossip and what they knew from the detectives questioning them poorly and being browbeaten into confessions. It was just a mess. The prosecutor, of course, was very disappointed that these guys were let out, but there was no other trial, no retrial, because they did a DNA test eventually. It took a while for the science to catch up, so it wasn't available the first time. The second time it was available, and it didn't match any of the four young men. What little evidence they had did not implicate any of them. One detective, Hector Polanco, he was accused of coercing false confessions in another case that ended tragically. And that really cast a pall over even the earlier testimony where they got these confessions. People really began to realize this was a problem. When the girls died, there was a serial killer in the area, Kenneth McDuff, which is somebody we should cover someday. He's a piece of work. He was in the area and he was looked at, but he was ruled out and he was executed on another case in 1998. He kidnapped a young woman from a car wash. Yeah. Anyway, there were more than 50 false confessions in this case. And when I told you it was a mess, it was coerced confessions, false confessions, suspicions falling in many, many different directions. And in 2006, one of the convictions, a young man named Robert Springsteen, was completely overturned. So he was exonerated. In 2008, because they finally, like I said, it took a long time for this to all unroll, and I'm sparing you kind of the boring technical details. But by 2008, because there was no DNA match of the suspects, jurors, 7 of the jurors came out after the fact and said, we would never have found these kids guilty had we known about the DNA. So both of them were released and subsequently all charges were dismissed. So the suspects' names were Forrest Wellborn, Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, and Springsteen and Scott were the 2 that were convicted and imprisoned and, tried and found guilty. And eventually that was overturned and they were freed. Wellborn, I don't know what really happened to him, but the 4th guy, Maurice Pierce, came to a tragic end. In 2010, he was pulled over at a traffic stop and he pulled a knife on the cop and actually stabbed the cop in the neck and was shot. And the cop survived, but he didn't. In 2022, because of this case, they passed the Homicide Victims Families Rights Act. And this was a push by the families of the girls to not let this case go cold because it was just sort of sitting there for a long time. In 2022, this happened in 1991. They wanted to ensure the review of cold cases every time there was new technology or new standards of investigation. There is no resolution to this. This is a very, very sad case. The families are left with no answers. The girls are, they receive no justice as such as it is. I don't know, I feel like retribution is not really justice, but I understand. I know how I would feel if my child ended up this way. These young men spent time in prison, and it's likely that they didn't do it, but so let's see, what time is it? Okay. I think I'm going to end this here, and I'm going to do behind the scenes in membership, a closer look at it, a closer dive into it. So that's the story of the yogurt shop murders, 1991. Just so sad. So thank you for watching. Now that I've cheered everybody up, my job here is done. Join me behind the curtain in my membership, please. Slán go foill. Slán.